On October 9th, 1903, the New York Times published an editorial stating that man wouldn't fly for another million years. But on December 17th, just 2 months later, man spread its wings and did just that. Up until this point, the French aeronauts had undisputably been ahead of the rest of the world in flight, inventing hot air balloons, steam-powered air balloons, and in 1908, they were on the cusp of a breakthrough for unassisted mechanical flight. The reports of the Wright brothers' Kitty Hawk tests were met with extreme skepticism from the Aero Club, with them going so far as to label the Wright brothers bluffers. On August 8th, Wilbur Wright arrived in France and stunned them by performing a series of flights in the Model A that none of their prototypes could have even dreamed of achieving. One of the biggest reasons the French were blindsided by the development was the Wright brothers' secrecy. They took great care to make sure their patent was secured and already had business deals in place to produce and sell the planes. The risk of someone stealing their ideas was just too great. In a world of ideas, the struggle to reach the top can be dangerous, with competitors trying their best to gain an edge over you, even through unethical means. Whether it's inventions, works of art, or an idea, copying others has always been an extremely lucrative and easy way to the top. If you recognize this riff, what song is it? If you said Under Pressure by Queen and David Bowie, you would be right. But if you said Ice Ice Baby by Vanilla Ice, you would be wrong. This is Ice Ice Baby. If it sounds almost exactly the same to you, you're wrong. Here's Vanilla Ice himself to tell you that.
Ding ding diggy ding ding. Ding 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 diggy ding ding. Ding 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 ding. That's the way theirs goes. Ours goes ding 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 diggy ding ding. Ding 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 diggy ding ding. That little bitty change. It's not the same.
So what constitutes fair use in a song? For years it's been an acceptable practice to sample other artists' music. But to be clear, Vanilla Ice is not even trying to claim this as a sample, because he was being sued by David Bowie and Queen at the time. If you look at most samples, the artist doing the sampling has received the recording rights to the original song, so there's no issue with copyright. Instead, sampling is usually used in a way that adds to the original sample. Take a song like Stan by Eminem or Stronger by Kanye. It's pretty obvious that people are okay with and even like songs that feature samples. The problem comes when an artist straight up lies about being inspired or blatantly rips off a song without asking for permission. Stealing from an artist who is popular is usually a terrible idea. You're going to get caught. But maybe you just need to set your sights a little lower. The 1974 film The Phantom of the Paradise is a somewhat obscure adaptation of the 1909 novel The Phantom of the Opera. It tells the story of a composer, Winslow, whose music, a cantata based on Faust, is stolen by the producer Swan, who wants to use it to open his new theater. Winslow tries to stop this from happening and in the process gets horrifically mangled. Donning a mask, he begins terrorizing the theater, right before they are set to open. Swan finds Winslow and makes a deal with him. If he stops terrorizing the theater, he will produce his cantata and open his theater with the version that Winslow wants. Winslow realizes that this is his opportunity to see the woman he has fallen in love with sing his music, and has Swan cast her in the leading role, agreeing to spend the remaining week finishing his great work. Now let's just pedal back a little bit. Who is Faust? Faust is probably based on a real person, Johann Faust, but has long since become a folk legend. As the story goes, Faust, unsatisfied with life, makes a pact with the devil, selling his soul for knowledge and power. In Phantom of the Paradise, Winslow does just that, selling his soul to the devil, the producer Swan, in order to finally see his work performed. As the movie goes on, however, Swan once again breaks his word to Winslow about how the music will be performed, causing Winslow to lash out and terrorize the opening performance, before realizing that he is literally under contract with Swan forever. Think about that in terms of the modern day. A couple of years ago, Taylor Swift was engaged in a legal battle with her record label for rights to her master records. The literal right to control her own music. Or take Kesha, who is engaged in a legal battle with her producer, Dr. Luke, with Kesha unable to release new music or perform her old music while in the midst of the suit. Saying these artists made a deal with the devil might be a little bit dramatic, but the overall predatory nature of the contracts that many young artists get themselves into is reminiscent of this scene from the movie.
Anyway, what difference does it make? What choice do you have? And now we're in business. Together. Forever.
Even if things had worked out for Winslow, his work would have been performed without anyone ever knowing him or recognizing him for his accomplishments. A literal ghostwriter. How many writers over the years have written music for others who are more marketable than them? If you know the name Hans Zimmer, you probably know that he is considered one of the most prolific film composers of all time, next to John Williams himself. But hang on, how much does Zimmer even write? All the subject matter in this specific section was reported on in a very informative 2022 Vanity Fair article, which I highly recommend you read, as this is just a brief summary. Hans Zimmer does collaborative composition, which means he has a team of over 200 people, any and all of which can be called upon when he has to work on a score. One composer even commented that Hans Zimmer once panicked in front of a director who came to visit because the supposed music he was writing for the film was on another composer's computer. This isn't unique to Zimmer, obviously. A lot of film composers operate in a similar way. Except John Williams, he's just actually that good. While ghostwriters get what is essentially below minimum wage, in most cases, the lead composer, someone like Zimmer, splits the royalties 50-50 with the ghostwriter who wrote the track. Unfortunately, when I recorded it the first time, my script did not explain this very well, so now here I am having to re-record it as I'm editing the video so that you can understand what I'm trying to say. So basically, what normally happens is there is a 50-50 split between the composer that is in name on the soundtrack and the person who actually writes any given track, aka the ghostwriter. But let's say that the lead composer gets the piece from the ghostwriter and says, wait a second, the tambourine is just a little bit too loud here. I think that we should change the mix. Then, under certain studios' contracts, the lead composer can get 75% of the royalties and the ghostwriter only gets 25%. But there's an even worse scenario than that, which is that if the lead composer sends a track to the director of the movie, or whoever is in charge of the movie, let's say maybe the sound design person, sends it back to them and they don't like it and they say, actually, could you change XYZ, and sends it back to the lead composer, if they even make a slight change on their end, can get 100% of the total royalties for a track, even though the ghostwriter wrote the entire thing. That is insane. I'm losing my mind. Another big thing about Hans Zimmer is the instantly recognizable. You've probably heard it in movies like Inception, so obviously he wrote it. Or he said he did in 2013, until a ghost composer, Mike Zarin, came forward and said, no, actually, I wrote that. You can see why artists want so desperately to be able to control the future of their own music. Otherwise, it's so easy for someone else to take credit for it. Your favorite film scores are being written by dozens of underpaid composers who might not even get royalties if they accidentally put the triangle part a little too loud. One of the biggest complaints in modern day pop culture is, why doesn't anyone make original movies or TV anymore? It's hard to argue with that, honestly. Most of the popular shows coming out right now are adaptations, like The Boys, House of the Dragon. I had more examples, I just forgot to write them in the script. The highest grossing movies in the box office are comic book movies and sequels to blockbuster franchises like Transformers, Planet of the Apes, and Godzilla. Of the 25 highest grossing films of all time, 12 are sequels of popular movies, 6 are comic book movies, and 2 are remakes. Of the remaining 5, Barbie and the Super Mario movie are based on already incredible popular characters, which leaves Avatar, Titanic, and Frozen as the only original films. I miss when films used to be original. Nosferatu is a 1922 film that basically started the horror genre. The vampire Count Orlok is disgusting, disease-ridden, disturbing, and a blight upon his local German town. The producer, Albin Grau, who also designed the look of Orlok, was inspired by a trip to Romania, where he essentially said, vampires are real. Nosferatu was highly praised when it came out, and it launched the career of director Murnau. Nosferatu is also an illegal adaptation of Bram Stoker's 1897 novel Dracula. Most of the changes made to the story are only in place and name, with the film being intended for German audiences instead of English. The Stoker estate would sue and win, with a court ordering all copies of Nosferatu destroyed. And yet, Nosferatu would continue to inspire future generations of filmmakers and is seen as a pioneer of the art form. Film has a long and storied history of making the same thing over and over, with every director adding their own little twist to it. I think it's pretty obvious that people are okay with some types of inspirations and adaptation and not okay with others. It's fair to want some originality in filmmaking, and it feels a little ridiculous when you get the third Batman or Spider-Man actor in 20 years, all for the sake of lining some executives' pockets. But there's nothing wrong with it as long as the proper people are getting credit for their work. In the 1960s, Junguru Taitei aired in Japan, based on the popular manga from the 50s. In it, the king of the jungle, Panja, is lured by a family member in danger and killed, driving his son into hiding, who later on returns to take his place as rightful ruler of the jungle, taking on some vicious hyenas on the way. In the 1990s, The Lion King was released in theaters. In it, the king of the jungle, Mufasa, is lured by a family member in danger and killed, driving his son into hiding, who later on returns to take his place as rightful ruler of the jungle, taking on some vicious Wait a second! Jungle Emperor was known as Kimba the White Lion in the United States when it aired in the late 1960s. Now, I'm not saying that Lion King definitively copied Kimba, but 488 Japanese animators felt so strongly about the inspirations that they sent a letter to Disney petitioning them to credit their inspiration. Disney, of course, denied any similarities and basically said the characters being similar was because of them having the same subject matter, aka being the jungles of Africa, and said that the animators and director had basically never seen Kimba the White Lion. Of course, it's impossible to prove whether or not this is plagiarism or a case of parallel thinking. I personally don't think that Lion King is some blatant plagiarism of Kimba the White Lion. The Lion King has its own soul and story to tell, and is genuinely one of the greatest movies of all time. But the similarities are pretty striking in some areas, and I don't believe that Kimba wasn't some sort of inspiration, so it's sad that the official stance is that they'd never seen Kimba the White Lion. Especially since animators who worked on the film have talked about how many of them knew Kimba intimately, were clearly inspired, and that the creators of Lion King knew the fact. And with Lion King spawning one of the most successful Broadway shows, a bunch of spin-offs, and a redundant remake that broke the box office, Kimba will continue to dwindle in relevance, which, if it was copied, is just sad. Teisuke Osama, the creator of Junguru Taitei and Astro Boy, is seen by many as the literal father of manga. Disney's continued efforts to claim he is unknown, and thus is not an influence on animation, has caused his name to be relatively unknown for the general public outside of Japan. Think about how many millions more would know his name if Disney just credited his inspiration, even in passing.
And that's where the section originally ended. A sad story about an artist's work being taken by the biggest art house in the world, and never credited. It's easy to say Lion King didn't copy Kimba. That's debunked. I get that sentiment, but it's also hard to debunk whether something is inspired or not. It's much more useful to look at whether or not that inspiration created something new, or just feels like a blatant ripoff. While everything I've said so far is certainly true, does it matter? Even if there were some animators who saw Kimba as kids and were inspired by it, how many more animators were inspired by other things they saw as a child? If Lion King doesn't copy Kimba's story or designs, can you really say it was so strongly inspired that it warrants crediting Osama? Especially if what the director says is true, that he was not inspired by Kimba at all. Does he really have to credit something that a handful of animators claim to have been inspired by? Do we really expect creators to list every one of their inspirations in depth whenever they create a new work? If you really want to go further, Lion King is basically just an adaptation of Hamlet by Shakespeare. So where are Will's royalties?
Christopher Marlowe was born in 1564. He was extremely bright by all accounts, and got his bachelor's degree from the prestigious Cambridge by the age of 20, and his master's soon after. After university, he began to write plays, one of which, Dr. Faustus, follows a man who sells his soul to the devil in order to gain power, and repents at the end only to be dragged down into hell anyway. I swear I've heard that somewhere before. Marlowe's work was heavily critical of the Church of England and arguably the government as a whole. In 1593, he was arrested for being an atheist, but released on conditions. 10 days later, he was stabbed by Ingram Frizzer, dying at the young age of 29. An extremely tragic story. Marlowe easily could have been the most prolific writer of all time if he had been allowed to continue writing. Just 2 weeks after the death of Marlowe, William Shakespeare would release his first play. Shakespeare was not particularly well educated and had only just appeared on the scene as an actor the year prior. He had little to no connections in politics at that point, and yet his works were extremely philosophically critical of the ruling class and status quo. His rise to fame was odd, and a lot of people throughout histories have had some theories as to why. So, what if I told you that William Shakespeare was actually a front for Christopher Marlowe? A couple of interesting things about Marlowe are that his master's degree was initially withheld from him, possibly due to his poor attendance at school. However, the university was sent a letter by the Queen's Council that Marlowe was assisting the country in beneficial matters, and the university granted him the degree. Add this to his long list of absences from school and his lavish lifestyle he shouldn't have been able to afford, and obviously he was a spy, right? It would be far-fetched until you look at the 3 people who were the only witnesses to his death: Frizzer, Nicholas Skeers, and Robert Poley, all 3 of whom had connections with a Sir Francis Walsingham, who was in charge of the Queen's Secret Service. So, what if Christopher Marlowe, knowing that he was in trouble for being a known atheist, staged his own death with the help of his spy buddies, then found a relatively unknown and uneducated actor who would continue to peddle his plays to the masses, so that Marlowe could continue to criticize from the shadows? That's a lot to take in. But there are a lot of historians who genuinely believe that's what happened, or some version of this. There's no real proof. First of all, Shakespeare probably started to perform his plays a full year earlier, in 1592. We know this because of a scathing review of his play, Henry VI, which calls him an upstart crow. By the time Marlowe died, he likely already had 4 or 5 plays in circulation. We also have a full 10-year gap in Shakespeare's life between the birth of his twins and his emergence as an actor. So to say he suddenly started writing after the death of Marlowe is just based on us lacking information. Marlowe is probably the most famous person attributed to being Shakespeare, but you can find a half a dozen other conspiracy theories about who actually wrote his works, each one with less evidence than the other. Maybe someday we will find the smoking gun that proves once and for all who actually wrote these plays, but until then, it's probably better to assume the guy who says he wrote it actually wrote it. It's interesting, we are so eager to take a look at someone's life work and say, yeah, but what if they didn't write it? Most historical conspiracies you find online are just variations on this. The ancient pyramids were built by aliens. Leonardo da Vinci was a time traveler. All just to discredit the works of people who came before us, in the name of uncovering the true history. Hang on, that's a pretty good topic. So the story goes something like this. Tesla was hired personally by Edison to come work for him, and offered him a large sum of money to fix some of his designs. But not only did Tesla not get the money, but Edison stole his designs and profited off of them. Tesla would end up only working for Edison for 6 months. And there you have it. Tesla, one of the most brilliant inventors of all time, died penniless while Edison stole all the credit and the money for it. A textbook example of a larger corporation or person stealing the work of a lower class worker. There's something weird about the story. Tesla only met Edison once in passing, after he had already been hired by the company. Okay, well, Tesla was already famous for his work, and Edison must have heard about him and had his company hire him. The personal invite stuff is just for effect then. Well, no, most of Tesla's famous inventions came after he had already worked for Edison. In fact, the reason he emigrated to the US was to work for the Edison factory in Manhattan, having already worked for 2 years in Paris with the Continental Edison Company. His boss got promoted and took Tesla with him. So, okay then, Tesla was already working for them, and it wasn't Edison who noticed Tesla's promise, instead it was his boss, Charles Batchelor. And even though Tesla wasn't well known yet, Charles Batchelor promised Tesla a large bonus to fix some designs of Edison and did not follow through. So the Edison company, at the very least, stole from Tesla, rather than old Tommy Boy himself. So what was the project? Well, Tesla was working on a new arc lamp for use in city streetlights, in hopes that it would be more efficient than the incandescent light bulbs that the Edison company was currently installing. bonus was $50,000 or approximately $1.6 million in today's money. Something is definitely a bit off with that number. Even if Tesla was a well-regarded worker by his boss at that point, it seems weird that he would be offered $1.6 million as a bonus. This number is directly stated in Tesla's autobiography that Batchelor himself promised the money for the arc lamp and several other related inventions. And this is the same Batchelor who was famously well known for being extremely stingy with his money. So stingy that he refused to give Tesla a $7 a week raise previously. So where is this number discrepancy coming from? Well, Tesla himself marks it up to being a practical joke. So okay, Tesla did work for Edison as a normal employee and probably wasn't offered a real bonus for his work, but at the very least, his work was stolen for profit by the Edison company. Right? There's just one problem with that too. None of Tesla's designs were ever put into production or patented by the Edison firm. They mostly just decided to move on from trying to replace the incandescent light bulbs and never found a use for Tesla's designs. Just a year later, Tesla would get a patent for the same arc light he was working on at Edison and put it into production in his own company. His own inventions unfortunately were less than popular, and the newly established Tesla Electric Light and Manufacturing Co. would close down, leaving him destitute. So this whole Edison stole from Tesla thing, it's weird, right? It's most likely a case of missing identity, people confusing the rivalry of Edison and Westinghouse and their war of the currents. Interestingly enough, Westinghouse actually did purchase one of Tesla's patents, that being an AC induction motor. But if I didn't mention this story of Edison stealing from Tesla in this video, people would comment about it and ask, where is it? Why didn't I mention that? How does a story get so warped to the point where it almost loops around to being a bizarre case of plagiarism? People copying down the story so many times and so badly that they keep getting the facts wrong. Remember that part earlier in the beginning? If you've heard about the infamous New York Times article, then you've probably seen this instead. December 8th, 1903. Less than 2 weeks before the flight, and an extremely bold headline. But this image is just wrong. Flying Machines Which Do Not Fly was an op-ed written specifically about the failures of Samuel Langley's aerodrome after his first tests in October. But the million years remark is buried towards the end of the article, not the headline. The December 8th date is notable because that is the day that Langley failed again with testing the aerodrome, and the Times did write an article about it on December 10th. But the million years remark is not in the second article. Instead, it just has this absolutely scathing remark. We hope that Professor Langley will not put his substantial greatness as a scientist into further peril by continuing to waste his money and time for further airship experiments. So for some reason, someone took the date of the subject matter of the second article and put a segment of the first article underneath it, as if it's a headline, just to make it more sensational. I could barely find this second article, to be honest, just snippets of it. And if I hadn't written this video, I would never have known the difference. How are so many of these historical accounts slowly losing more and more of the actual facts, until a warped version of the truth becomes part of the public consciousness? Historians make mistakes. When a new history of something is written, events can be copied down incorrectly, especially if the current writer is more focused on adding new research content. In those situations, they may feel compelled to embellish certain stories from the original source material, and after a couple of renditions, that story can lose its factual basis and slip into myth and legend. As a kid, one of my favorite book series was Horrible Histories, and they are what made me interested in the subject of history in the first place. But this is where I also learned about the Christopher Marlowe conspiracy, and while the author doesn't say, this 100% happened, he does present it as a possible version of events. And he does that throughout the series, versions of events that are told as exciting dramatized stories that are framed as possibilities. But I read these as a kid. There are facts that I remember from these books that are probably fiction, or at the very least dramatized. It should be easier than ever to find the truth about a historical event, with the rise of Google and the internet. And yet instead, we see the rapid spread of misinformation. It's bad enough when it's a silly story from hundreds of years ago getting misquoted. It's even worse when it's a story from 2024. It's so easy to fall victim to misinformation on the internet, And now, even the Google search engine is starting to get worse, as Alphabet Inc. desperately tries to make AI your new best friend. So let's talk about the elephant in the room, AI. AI-generated art is currently a very hot-button issue, which, if by now you don't think is blatantly ripping off someone else's work, then please seek help. A lot of the defense of AI is just a tool for artists feels a bit moot when the original artist's work is so heavily ripped off. If you're going to use it as a tool, then you should actually own the rights to the art you're training your AI on. Joel Haver is well known for using it in this way, and it's impressive what he's able to do. Corridor Digital is a phenomenal channel that is always pushing the boundaries of visual effects, but they came under a lot of controversy last year. Their short, anime rock paper scissors, was made to test the limits of a new AI program. They shot real-life footage and transitioned it into single frames with AI, an AI trained not only on the actor's likeness, but a specific art style, the anime Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust. The result is impressive, and the amount of work they clearly put into this project can't be undersold. But they didn't own that art, and a lot of people felt very strongly about the idea that a large channel for artists would make a video about using AI to replace artists. Not to mention the title being, "Did we change animation forever?" rubbing people the wrong way. So, when episode 2 came out, a full-length episode this time, Corridor did something a little different. This time they hired an actual artist to draw character model sheets for them, so that they could train the AI on it. And for their efforts, the second anime rock paper scissors looks incredible. But it's because of the work they put into using AI as a tool, rather than get out of jail free card. It would be pretty easy for me to just dunk on AI artists on Twitter about how bad their art looks and how stupid they are for thinking they are real artists, but I think it's better to ask, why do people feel the need to use AI to create instead of learning how to create themselves? It's genuinely baffling. It's one thing to try and mess around with AI for the sake of it. I think a lot of people had fun typing PS2 Hagrid robs a bank into DALL-E when it first came out. Maybe that was just me. But using AI to legitimately make yourself out to be an artist or to replace an actual artist's work out of sheer laziness is frankly just sad. I've gotten comments saying that my previous video script was AI generated. And while I wish I had thought of that, would have saved me a lot of time, and I might have even been a better written script than what I came up with, I also would not have come away from my video feeling like I accomplished anything. I like making YouTube videos because I enjoy the process, from writing a script to putting it all together in an editor. I'm genuinely happy when a video does well because I am the sole person who created it. I saw a video pop up on my YouTube feed earlier. It was the piece Dolphin Shoals from Mario Kart 8, but they had used AI to extend the song past its natural ending. Something about this is deeply unsettling. The idea that music, an art form so full of personal expression, can be simply replaced by a machine is haunting. Especially music so rooted in jazz tradition, like Dolphin Shoals. What is it all for? Are people so starved for new music that they're willing to accept even soulless AI renditions? So starved for new art of naked anime girls that they stop caring that it all looks the same? I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say AI feels very similar to the themes of Faust. The tech bro sphere as a whole has sold their creative soul to AI for profit, and the right to be lazy and create at the touch of a button, no matter how soulless that creation may be. I promise this section as a whole will be short. H-Bomber Guy essentially berserk eclipsed the topic of YouTube plagiarism in his 4-hour video a couple months ago. I'm just here to pick up the scraps, because copying on YouTube really is rampant. Unlike with movies or books, proving someone else stole your video idea is a lot harder. So, people with scrupulous morals and a desire to turn over some sweet easy profit just rip off creators' entire shtick. As a whole, this is leading to the Mr. Beastification of YouTube, with smaller creators seeing the wide success of Mr. Beast's videos and trying to mimic them. I didn't coin the term Mr. Beastification. I think I saw this video pop up on my YouTube feed and the term just stuck with me. Smaller creators are growing off of being essentially copycats and bringing in the same audience as Mr. Beast. I could decry this as being a new wave of cynical, lazy content creation, but this is how YouTube has worked for years. Some style of video starts getting big and everyone rushes to copy it in some way before setting in and finding their own style. Look at PewDiePie, Markiplier, or Jacksepticeye, who all came up around the same time with the same bit, screaming and yelling at horror games. Before that started to die out and they branched out and did their own things. Reacting used to be a big thing on YouTube. It got so popular these guys tried to copyright the word react, instead of having an Oppenheimer moment and regretting what they started. Now, reacting to content is an easy way to keep your Twitch viewers engaged while you're in the bathroom or eating lunch. The YouTube landscape has changed over the years, with long-form content slowly carving out its niche. Used to be that you wouldn't post a video over 15 minutes long. Now you have a 10-hour-long bad video review of the Pokemon games. Video essays as a whole have changed the platform. With such a popular format, it's not surprising that some people would just rip off the more popular creator's style. Some people would say I ripped off Lemon in the last video, so I guess in the future I'm gonna have to go and rip off somebody else.
If you've noticed, I've been using clips from Pixar's Coco throughout the video. In the film, Miguel travels to the afterlife and tries to get his family's blessing, only to be rejected because he refuses to give up music. He then seeks out the great musician Ernesto de la Cruz, who he believes is his great-great-grandfather. He meets a skeleton named Hector, who offers to help if Miguel can get his living family to remember him before he disappears forever from the afterlife. Miguel abandons Hector to find Ernesto, and as it turns out, Ernesto actually stole all his music from Hector, who is Miguel's real relative. And the end of the movie sees both his family and the town realizing the truth, and Hector gets the recognition he deserves and his family back. It's really beautiful, honestly, and me summarizing it like this does not do it justice. It really highlights how sad it can be for an artist to be forgotten, for a person to be forgotten. But it also paints a hopeful picture that we can try our best to reverse that. It's never too late to celebrate the real creator's accomplishments.
Every year, it feels like a big news story comes out about an artist's work being copied, plagiarized, or misused in some way. So many great inventors throughout history will never be acknowledged for their work. Artists who've had their entire portfolio plagiarized to train an AI will never receive compensation or recognition for the millions of images generated from their life's work. Musicians who work for subpar pay, writing some of the most important music of our time, only for someone else's name to get slapped on it, or forced into contracts that guarantee their work will never truly belong to them. I don't know how we fix these problems. And that's sad. The most that I or anyone can do is continue to set the record straight, and continue to talk about and criticize this issue. But for every example of someone stealing another's work, we also have examples of those just being inspired. And that's fine. Art builds upon itself, as long as we make sure to credit those who laid the foundation. The reason that Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus makes a deal with the devil is because he's bored. He's bored of trying to learn the normal way at university, and he wants a quick and easy way to gain knowledge, and that makes him susceptible to being seduced by the underworld. If history has shown us anything, it's that many people don't want to create. They just want to get the rewards of a creation. In many ways, that destroys the entire purpose of creating, especially in art. It's a form of self-expression, with the journey being just as important as the destination. In a world of ideas, there will always exist those who want to cut that journey short and steal others' ideas in order to do so. With such tough competition, you better hold on to your own work, or someone else might come along and claim it as their own.
And you want to know what the real kicker is? The story of Faust is probably not even originally German or based on the man Faust himself. It's probably 800 years older, and it's just a folk legend that eventually found its way to Germany. Basically, you can't trust anyone, even me.